Well, good afternoon. We still have some people coming in, but I thought I'd get us started here a little bit. I think that you're in for a treat today. I've known Rob Ryan for quite a few years, and it's been a joy. Every time I've met with him or talked with him, I've learned something. He's one of the most innovative entrepreneurs and supporters of entrepreneurs that I've ever met or even heard about. And contrary to what might be in the press, the three gentlemen that we're going to be listening to this afternoon, all live here. These are not second homes. They live in Montana. They have a love for Montana, and they've given of their time and their expertise to come here this morning and talk to us. And I think you're gonna be in for a real treat here. Sunflower Edge, I've had some chats with Rob about this, and it's amazing, and it works. Rob founded a company that became what many believe was the real center of the internet, the real reason the internet became what it is. Rob checked the employee books. Al Gore was not an employee. So we can say that Rob was the father of the internet. He's been in Montana for how many years now?
16.
16 years, and I've been amazed at how dedicated he is to working with Montana entrepreneurs. He really goes out of his way. Today, during the course of the day, I hope you'll have a chance to talk with him personally and introduce yourself. He's really a treasure for the state of Montana. Rob Ryan.
Thank you. So you're probably wondering what the sunflower is all about and what this Sunflower Edge is all about. So let me kind of give you a little heads up on it. You know, when you're starting a company or you're in a company or you're self-employed, the hardest task you have is actually to invent a product or a service. In business schools and such, they don't start with that. They assume that you actually have a product or a service, and they tell you about how to run a business. But the most creative thing you have to do is come up with a good idea. And in my travels, you know, I teach at Cornell and I teach at different places. You ask a large audience, do you want to be an entrepreneur? And you almost get 100% raising their hands. Then you ask them why most of them aren't an entrepreneur, and the answer is they don't have an idea. They can't figure out the product or the service. So what we're talking about today is a way of thinking, a process by which you can invent an idea, a product or a service. In fact, the Sunflower Edge is my special sauce that I've used to invent my own companies. And these were multi-billion-dollar companies that grew from zero, from 3 or 4 founders. And I've done it over and over again, and I've used it also with nonprofits for them to actually increase the amount of revenues into their nonprofit organization. And I've used it with small businesses. So I know it works, but I've been using it for 18 years. And instead of squirreling it to myself and just continuing to make money off of it, I've decided to actually write a book on it, to disperse it as widely as I can. And this is actually one of the little kickoff meetings. The book actually will come out in second quarter of next year. And so I hope you enjoy, you know, the Sunflower Edge. So what is the Sunflower Edge? I'm going to give you an example using Honda. Honda does ATVs, they do weed whackers, they do lawn mowers, they do automobiles. What else do? They do pumps, they do cars. You know, are they a car company or are they a weed whacker company? Or maybe they're a lawnmower company. They would tell you they're none of those companies. What they are is an engine company. They do small to medium-sized engines, and then they leverage those engines into products that could utilize the engine, hence all of the different businesses they're in. So their core, the center of their sunflower, is engine technology. Their petals are all the different product market areas around the circle. What we didn't have on this little diagram is the stem of the sunflower, which is an important thing, which is the driving forces. Underlying driving forces, for example, for Honda might be the cost of gasoline. I mean, if the cost of gasoline and the availability of gasoline was very poor and the costs were very poor, then that would impact all their businesses. Today I'm going to talk to you about a language of innovation, one that I've used multiple times. It has 4 elements to it: core, petals, stem, and the matrix. The hardest thing for an entrepreneur or wannabe entrepreneur, a small business person, or even a large business person to understand is, what is your core competency? What is it that you do that's better than anyone else, that's totally unique? Let me give you examples of me querying people on this. A couple of months ago, at a party in Chicago with a guy that is the CEO of a $9 billion company. He founded it, his family did, Medline. And I said to him, what do you think your core competency is? And he paused, and then he said, we listen. We listen good. We listen good. I said, well, wow, that's interesting. You listen good. Do you think all your competitors would say that they don't listen? That they're really, really bad at listening? He said, well, I don't know. I said, you know, that's not a core competency. That's a hairy statement way up in the air. Another example, a very large nonprofit, multi-billion-dollar nonprofit. Same question. What do you do well? We execute well. We execute well. We implement things well. Again, very, very high statement, not of much use. So when thinking of the core, meaning your special sauce, meaning that which you do really, really well, you have to drill down. You have to get a very precise statement of it. Let me give you an example with this young man right over here. Tim is my assistant, but Tim in the evening is an entrepreneur. He has Blodgett Canyon Winery. They make wine. So, I mean, he could make as a core competency statement is we make wine. We execute wine well. That isn't actually what he does at all. What he actually did is say, we blend wines. We're really, really good at taking different kinds of wines and blending them, and potentially over time, perhaps blending other things in the wine. And we also personalize the wine with the labeling so that you could have your own label on it for a wedding or for a restaurant or for whatever. So now that statement has been drilled down. It's much more detailed. That's an example of a good core competency. Petals are the fun part. This is where you try to take what you're good at, the core competency, and try to figure out all the ways that you can actually exploit it. Again, let's use Tim. His idea, mixing and blending wines, personalizing labels. Well, how many ways can we exploit that? Well, we can sell it to the general public at fairs and such. That's one way. We could go to restaurants and have the restaurants actually get their own personalized labels. We can go to weddings and have the wedding party, for example. So there's a whole host of different ways he can exploit the core competency. When you're doing the petals, one of the things you'll discover is you don't have time to do all of them or even to investigate all of them. So you're going to have to figure out which ones make sense and which ones make less sense. There's a whole bunch of ways of doing that, and I'll tell you a little bit in a minute about them, but some of the criteria that you use is, one that I use, for example, is how much does it really exploit your core competency? For example, in the case of the wine and labeling for the wedding, it exploits everything. He's blending a specific wine and then he's putting a specific label on it for the wedding party or for the restaurant or for the supermarket. So that's a very good example of exploiting things. A good core competency leads to a lot of petals, and a lot of petals have to be differentiated. the way they end up being differentiated is what I call a matrix, and it's a very big term for a very simple concept. You have a set of criteria by which you measure whether the petals that you came up with, the ideas that you came up with, are good. And let me give you an example of some of the criteria. Value proposition is one of them. And in fact, that's the one I use the most. So if you came into me at my ranch and said you had an idea, one of the very first questions I would ask you is about the value equation. So what is this value equation? Very simply, if you built a product, let's say you built it and you're charging the customer $100 for the product. And let's say that that product saves the customer or makes the customer $500. I would say that that value equation is very, very good because there's a 5-to-1 ratio there. Your product only costs $100, but it's saving the customer $500. Very good. That gets a very high score. What if, in fact, it cost $100, but it only saves $150? How would that score? Well, that wouldn't score very well in my book, by the way. It would only get about a 5 or a 6 on a grading system of 1 through 10. What if you said it $75 or $50 it saves for the customer? Then it gets a 0. So the value proposition to me is highly correlated with the success of your core competency in that product that you're engaged in. No value means you're not going to grow the company. And finally, the STEM, the driving forces. The driving forces in Tim's business, there's several of driving forces. One is that there's an industry-wide driving force that people like hybrid wines, like blended wines. That's going in his favor. That's good. Another driving force is the availability of grapes and the cost of the grapes. He has to make the wine. He buys the grapes. If the grapes are expensive or you can't get them, then he's out of business. So somebody that ignores the driving forces and doesn't understand what they are might not set up multiple sources for the grapes, for example, and will find themselves out of business one year.